Alrighty, looks like we're live again. Hopefully nobody tries to bother me today. Not that anybody really bothered me yesterday, but anyways, today is December 26th, Boxing Day. There's my pal Rio on the floor, soaking in the sun by the warmth of the wood stove. My other pal, my river girl, who I love, she's an American. I had her flown in. So today, I'm going to continue on with another chapter, or maybe even two, to bash on with Kevin Weeks's book Brutal, the inside story, or the untold story of his life inside Whitey Bulger's Irish mob. It's pretty nice today. We got a lot of rain last night. Man, did it pour. Like, I got flooding out there, but I'm not too worried about it. Chapter 9, page 179, for those following along. Jimmy and Southie. Jimmy had his own unique sense of morality. Even though he spent so much of his life involved in violent crime, he still believed that certain crimes cannot be committed, certainly not on his turf anyhow, and he never hesitated to help someone he felt needed his help. But even when he felt compassion for someone in need, Jimmy could appreciate the same morbid black humor I enjoyed. For instance, one day Jimmy, Stevie, and I were driving up Broadway in Jimmy's dark blue Ford LTD when we noticed this lady coming down the street in a motorized wheelchair. Jimmy stared at her for a minute and said, "I wonder what that poor lady does in the winter." I looked at him and said, "Snow tires?" Laughing, he said, "You dirty bastard. Don't you have any sympathy for anybody?" We had lots of those sick kind of laughs, but heroin dealers were one subject about which Jimmy had no sense of humor. We didn't deal with them. Jimmy wouldn't let them in town. Even though cocaine and marijuana were well established in Southie, if we found out anyone was selling those drugs to a kid, they had a problem. We went after them too. However, as long as Jimmy was in charge, heroin never took root and was never going to. If we found out about a heroin dealer, Jimmy and I let them know they had to get out of town. If they didn't, I'd beat them up. It might have taken more than one business visit, but they always left. If the rare cases, or in the rare cases when they didn't leave after a beating, we told them on our second visit we would kill them the next time. Then they left. There were some exceptions, of course, like the Kivlin brothers, Al and Pat. Unfortunately, the Kivlins, both ex-boxers in their 40s, with broken noses and scar tissue around their eyes, never listened to anyone. In 1990, a girl Jimmy knew came to the store and said her daughter couldn't play in her own backyard because of the needles there. Jimmy and I went over to the house on F and Silver Streets, a two-family house whose yard abutted the three-decker house where the Kivlins lived on the first floor. Excuse me. The houses were just up the street from where a Metropolitan District Commission cop lived. The girl showed us the needles and told us that every time the police came, the Kivlins got rid of the stuff and the cops couldn't find a thing. The MDC cop told us the same story. Whenever he called the cops, everyone in the house was gone by the time they got there. The next day, they were back in business. The Boston cops told us directly that they couldn't catch the guys. One Friday night, we came to the house, and when people started pulling up, we told them to get the fuck out of there. On Saturday night, we came back and saw the same people pulling up. When they started to go into the house, Jimmy and I got out of the car, and I beat up 2 or 3 of them. You're getting off easy with a beating, Jimmy told them. Next time we see you here, we'll kill you. When nothing changed the next night, Teddy Devins and I went over to the Curly Lumber Yard on Monday and bought some sheets of plywood. Then we drove the truck over to Kilvin's house, stood on the bed of the truck, and with people still inside the house, started to nail the plywood over the windows. The brothers were too scared to come out, but as we continued nailing, we could see one of their wives, stunned, looking out at us. When we finished, we spray painted the plywood with the words "out of business, no drugs." Later that day, we caught up with Al Kivlin and his brother on G Street and 4th and told them they had 24 hours to get out or we would kill them. By Tuesday, they were gone from the house on F and Silver for good. A day or so later, the MDC cop and some other neighbors came down to the store to thank us. They told us we had done what the Boston cops hadn't been able to do. Obviously, we used different tactics than the Boston cops. Another heroin dealer who needed some persuasion to move out of Southie was some kid in the old colony project. When we heard people complaining about noise at all hours of the night in one building there, we considered it unacceptable. There were little babies in that building, and the residents had older kids who couldn't sleep because of cars pulling up and doors slamming loudly at all hours of the night. The first time we went into the building, the dealer jumped out the side window and took off. On our next visit, we caught up with him and told him that that was it. He was out of business. Things died down a little, but a week later, the heroin dealer was back in full swing. The third time I went up to the house, I had knocked on the door. The dealer answered, and I gave him a beating and knocked him out. But he still didn't learn. Shortly afterward, we heard that he had started dealing again. One afternoon, Jimmy and I were driving down East 9th Street in the old colony project when Jimmy noticed, fuck, I can't read that there. Where is it? The old colony project when Jimmy noticed him walking on the sidewalk. Jimmy just pulled the car onto the sidewalk and ran him over. The kid ended up in the hospital with some broken bones in his legs, but he moved out of old colony. How many times do you have to tell someone to get out before he finally gets the message? Again, another super popular live stream Nobody watching. No thumbs up. All I'll get is views in the aftermath. One angel dust dealer needed a little extra persuasion too. He lived in the old colony project right down the street from where my mother lived on Pilsudski Way, and was stealing or selling dust to everyone. People started coming into the variety store to complain that he was even selling to kids who were getting messed up on the shit. So Jimmy and I drove down and waited for him to come out of his house. Then we grabbed him, put him in the back seat, drove him around, terrorizing him, and then told him he was out of business and to get the fuck out of town. A short time later, we started to hear that the kid was back in business. Obviously, he didn't realize we knew he was starting up again. Because one afternoon he walked into the store, but as soon as I saw him, I went to stand in back of him and blocked the door. He took off running and screaming and calling so much attention to himself that I had to let him go. The next day, Jimmy and I met down at the variety store, and as we exited the store to get to the car, we saw the kid coming across Old Colony Avenue. He was halfway across the street, standing on the Meridian Strip, yelling, "Whitey, Kevin, I'll pay you if you let me stay in business. I'll give you half my money, half the money I make." Jimmy turned around saying, "You little motherfucker," and took out a knife, but the kid took off running again. A few weeks later, he got pinched for drug dealing. Law enforcement tried to get him away to say he was paying us to sell drugs. That way, we were shaking him down so he could sell his angel dust. No, the kid told them they were going to kill me if I didn't stop selling. They told me to get out of town. That was the only good thing the kid did. He told the truth. Still, the cops continue to ask for help with people selling heroin. You guys can't do things we can't, or you guys can do things we can't. They kept telling us, so we go down and drive the dealers out of town. But then we started to hear that the same cops were grabbing the people afterward. "We know you're paying Whitey and Kevin." They tell the dealers and try to get them to admit that. So we backed away from running people out of town. If the police or even a good Samaritan asked us, we figured there was a good place. There was a good chance it was a setup. Jesus. There was very little prostitution in Southie. It was pretty much restricted to Boston's combat zone downtown. But whenever Jimmy and I saw anyone doing that, we went after them. I'd say over 25 years, it happened maybe 2 or 3 times, but when it did, we took care of the guys who had grabbed young girls and were trying to pimp them. We'd get a hold of the guys and tell them to get the fuck out of town. That was just one of the things we were engaged, but we never ran out of people who wanted to run out of, or we wanted to run out of town. One especially despicable creep was this guy in his late 30s or early 40s who we called Wheels because he was in a wheelchair. On Saturday, in early 1980s, around 2 in the afternoon, I was standing on Broadway across the street from the South Boston Savings Bank with Jimmy, Kevin O'Neill, and Bobby Ford, who used to run a booking office in Southie for Jimmy. We looked over and saw Wheels bumming money off people. An alcoholic, the guy could get up and walk, but he preferred to shuffle his feet, to push the chair and spin the wheels with his hands, pretending he was a cripple. That way he could beg for money for wine. He typically asked a guy for change and wouldn't say a word if the guy said no, but if a woman refused him money for wine, he'd be swearing and grabbing onto her dress. That afternoon, the piece of shit was swearing at one particular woman in her 50s who had a grandchild with her, calling her everything in the book. Furious as I watched him degrade the poor woman, I walked across the street and grabbed the back of his chair by the handles. I intended to push him down the driveway behind the bank into the parking lot, but he put his feet down, grabbed the wheels, and stopped me dead. I couldn't move him. So I threw the wheelchair and him over onto the ground. Then I picked up the wheelchair and smashed it on the street. Wheels was on the ground yelling, so I gave him a boot in the back. When I walked back across the street, 3 guys were doubled over laughing with tears running down their faces. It's pretty hardcore. What's so funny, I asked. You look like the meanest prick in town, Jimmy told me in between bursts of laughter. Fucking asshole can walk, I said. Yeah, we know. But they don't, Jimmy said and pointed to the people across the street. Sure enough, all the people were trying to help him up. They thought that poor old wino was being picked on. Let's get out of here, I said. One night, 2 weeks later, Kevin O'Neill and I were driving around when we saw Wheels in front of the Marion Manor nursing home in Dorchester, doing his same thing, going after women who were leaving from work at the nursing home. This time I jumped out of the car, came up behind him, pulled up the hood on my sweatshirt and threw Wheels out of the chair. Then I pushed it up 4th Street where Kevin had parked the car and dumped it into the trunk. A few streets later, I took the chair out of the trunk and tossed it into someone's backyard. That's kind of shitty. That was his thing, eh? He was just a jerk off, but still good to go. A week later, Bobby Ford saw Wheels on Broadway. Bobby did pretty much the same thing I did, except he drove over to the Somerset Street Bridge where he threw the chair into the water. That, we all figured, was the end of Wheels and his wheelchair. A year later, Jimmy and I were walking into Store 24 on West Broadway when someone came up to Jimmy and said, "Hi, Whitey, how you doing?" Jimmy stared at him for a minute and then yelled out, "Wheels!" The guy was all dressed up with khaki pants and a nice shirt. His hair, pardon me, his hair cut neatly and his face clean shaven. "I've been sober for almost a year," he told us. "I'm doing good. A perfect example that even the worst prick can change." There were times, however, when Jimmy wasn't around, when I was called upon to take care of some of these pricks, particularly when they were messing with people who mattered to Jimmy, like with Nancy Stanley, Teresa's daughter. Jimmy was out of town when Nancy came down to the variety store upset about some guy named John who had just gotten out of jail and was bothering her. First thing I did was call him and tell him I heard he was looking for a job. I asked him if he had a driver's license and said he could have a job delivering liquor. I told him to come down to the variety store, which was next to the liquor store, so uh, to see me. I gotta switch, trying to quit saying as much. So pardon me. When the guy who was probably around 5'10" and 220 pounds came into the store, I had him follow me downstairs to the office. As soon as we got there, I turned around and cracked him a right hand, splitting him open over both eyes, his eyes, and breaking his nose. Then I stomped on his knee till it cracked. Finally, I hit him and broke his ribs. While John was moaning in pain, two of us dragged him upstairs and threw him on the floor. As he hobbled towards the door, a woman who worked at the store saw him on the floor and thought he'd been in a car accident. She started to dial 911, but someone told her Kevin did that, and she hung right up. John managed to stagger into his car, but before he drove away, I came over to tell him that if he came near Nancy again, I'd kill him. I saw him a few weeks later on crutches, but he never came anywhere near Nancy again. There were countless times when Jimmy performed generous acts towards those in need, not for notoriety, but because he thought it was the right thing to do. He was an extremely generous guy. No one except the people he helped knew exactly what he did, but he thought nothing of paying the rent for families in need, or buying bicycles or coats or food for needy kids, or cars for families who needed to take their kids to school. Many times he found jobs for people who needed them. At Christmas time, he'd buy gifts for children and their families, and he'd also gave money to St. Augustine Food Pantry. If he saw an old lady having trouble trying to cross the street, he'd get out of his car and stop traffic to help her across. If he saw a woman carrying boxes, he'd put her in his car and drive her home. If someone was bothering a family, he'd say to me, "Let's take a ride," and he'd stop by to help with the situation, as well as to look around to see if anything was broken. If he saw the family needed a new refrigerator or some furniture, he'd go right down and buy whatever they needed and have it all delivered to them. If he heard about anyone picking on girls or mothers who were living in families without brothers or fathers, we'd go down and grab those guys. Pretend she's my mother or sister, he'd tell the bullies, and then go ahead and bother her again and see what I do. The only reason you're picking on her is that you think no one will come after you, but I will. But we didn't help every resident of Southie whose kid was being picked on. For example, one woman Jimmy knew well came to us to complain about a kid or a guy who was bothering her daughter. Well, will Kevin give the kid a beating, Jimmy? Or she asked Jimmy. While I was standing right there, Jimmy looked at her and said, "What about your two sons? Why don't they go after him?" She turned around, looked at me, and said, "Oh no, they could get in trouble." "Oh, and Kevin can't?" Jimmy said. You want Kevin to stick up for your family, and you don't want your own sons to get involved because they could get in trouble. Sorry, we can't help you." And the two of us walked away. It would have been a different story if she didn't have any sons, but that woman had her own boys to take care of the problem. Certainly, Jimmy made sure no one took advantage of us, of his own family. One night, one night when he was living with his elderly mother old at the old harbor project, he heard some kid playing basketball outside after midnight. He went down and told them to knock it off. When the kids ignored him and continued to playing, he went out with a knife and stabbed and flattened the ball. One of the kids started saying stuff to him, so Jimmy turned around and stabbed him, opening it, opening up his stomach. Then he put the kid, who was in his late teens or early 20s, into his car and drove him to the hospital. He'd get especially angry when he heard about someone in Southie being robbed by a resident of the town. "Don't rob off people who have less than you," he'd tell the thieves. "Go to Newtown or Wellesley, anywhere they have more money than here, but leave your own people alone." When he heard about a young boy in Southie who was raped, he sent the whole family to Disneyland. Yeah, they probably got raped there too by the losers at Disneyland. Bunch of perverts, but he also had a strong sympathy for gasoline station attendants. He'd pull in for gas when it was freezing cold out, and take off his gloves and give them to the kid who was pumping his gas. "Keep them," he'd tell the kid. "You're out here in the rain and snow." And he always tipped the kid who was pumping his gas. "You give $5 to some asshole behind the bar who opens a bottle of beer for you," he'd say, "while this kid is out there freezing his ass off and working a hell of a lot harder than the kid in the bar." Whenever he came across a cause he believed in, he didn't hesitate to help out. Like with Charlie Ross, a longshoreman on the Boston waterfront, whose family lived near ours on Pilsudski Way, and whose daughters I went to school with in the 1980s. Charlie was picking the globe with a few other members of the ancient order of Hibernians because of a cartoon that was hurtful to the Irish. The cartoon depicted a rat plunging an explosive device, wearing a shamrock top hat, and dressed up as a leprechaun. Charlie wanted the Globe to retract the cartoon and make a positive statement rather than to interfere with that all Irishmen were rats because of the IRA. Jimmy and I donated $200 to Charlie's cause, money that Charlie turned over to the families of the political prisoners in Irish prisons like Long Kesh and Mace. Jimmy's loyalty to friends had no limits, even if the friends lived far from Southie. Two such friends were from Alcatraz, where Jimmy served time from 1958 to 63. Jimmy often wore the belt buckle engraved with Alcatraz 34 to 63 that FBI agent Nick Gian Turco had given to him. Clarence Carnes was a close friend of Jimmy's during his years there, and the two of them had been involved in fights. Carnes had come to Alcatraz in 1945 at the age of 18, the youngest inmate ever imprisoned there. He'd been part of the May 1946 escape attempt in which 6 prisoners killed 2 guards and the Marines were called in to restore order. Carnes was spared from the death penalty that 2 of the escapees received because he had not taken part in the murders of the 2 prison guards. After Carnes died in 1988 and was buried in Pauper's grave outside a Missouri prison hospital, Jimmy had made arrangements to have his body exhumed and buried in a Native American funeral in Oklahoma. Jimmy had the funeral home take care of the details, and then he had Teresa flew out to Oklahoma, rented a car, and drove to the burial ground. The arrangements cost him $15,000 to $20,000. Thanks for the like, much appreciated. The stories that Carnes was gay and died of AIDS was bullshit. He was an alcoholic, which was why he had gotten into trouble in the first place. At age 16, drunk, he had held up a gas station and killed the attendant, for which he received a life sentence at Oklahoma State Reformatory. After an escape attempt there, he was transferred to Leavenworth and later to Alcatraz. Even when he was actually paroled, Carnes violated his parole and ended up back in prison where, on a dialysis, he died at age 61 from cirrhosis of the liver, not AIDS. At the Native American funeral ceremony, Jimmy met Carnes' relatives who thanked him for what he had done. Carnes wasn't the only friend from Alcatraz who Jimmy remembered. During a visit to Alcatraz after his release, Jimmy met Whitey Thompson, a former inmate who was now giving tours there. Thompson had been at Alcatraz from 1958 to 62, but he hadn't been a high-profile inmate, and he and Jimmy hadn't known each other. None of the different guys from Alcatraz whom Jimmy had kept in touch with remembered Thompson either. But when Thompson told Jimmy he was writing a book about his experiences at Alcatraz, Jimmy gave him $1,500 towards the book. In 1989, after Jimmy got a copy of the finished autobiography titled Last Train to Alcatraz and later retitled Rock Hard, he was furious. Whitey Thompson had written about another inmate, Alvin Karpus, referring to him as Creepy Karpus, the name law enforcement, which liked to give people nicknames to make them seem more sinister, had hung on him. Karpus had been with the Ma Barker gang and had served time in Alcatraz from 1936 to 1962. Wow. Johnny told me Carpy's own explanation of how he'd been captured in 36. J. Edgar Hoover had declared him public enemy number 1 when the feds finally surrounded Karpus and threw their guns on him. Hoover was around the corner hiding behind the bushes. He yelled out to his men, "Is it safe? Do you have him?" "It's all right, boss," they told him. When they had subdued Karpus on the ground, Hoover came out from the bushes and put the handcuffs on him. That way he could say he was the one who got Karpus. No one who knew Karpus ever called him creepy, but one time Karpus and another guy were digging an escape tunnel in a narrow passageway down by the boiling hot steam pipes. It was so hot that the 2 guys would strip down to their underwear and go in to dig the hole. When they came out, they were so filthy and covered with dirt that they jumped right into the shower. After one guard saw the two of them together in the wide open shower, he reported they were homosexuals. In his book, Whitey Thompson wrote that Karpis was a fag. Jimmy knew Karpis well, and he took exception to the statement. Furious that he had given money to Thompson to get this book started and that he had written all kinds of lies in it, Jimmy flew back out to Alcatraz. This time he waited for Whitey Thompson to come around and give his tours. There was no doubt he was going to kill him. After he couldn't find Thompson at Alcatraz, Jimmy found out that he was living in Washington. So he traveled up there to find and kill him. Thompson was just lucky that Jimmy had to stop tracking him up there and return to the business in South Boston. If it weren't for that, Jimmy, who was a hunter, would definitely have found and killed him. As it turns out, hi, Stock Explorer. Actually, just give me a second and I'm finished this chapter. If it weren't for that, Jimmy, Jimmy, who was a hunter, would definitely have found and killed him. As it turned out, Karpis wrote 2 books about his experiences in Alcatraz, Public Enemy Number 1 and On the Rock, before he died in Spain in 1979. Thompson died on June 7th, 2005. I wonder where Jimmy was that day. Very interesting, man. Very interesting. Hello, Stock Explorer. I hope you had a very Merry Christmas. I just finished reading chapter 9. How the boys would, Jimmy and the boys would help kind of police the neighborhood in South Boston. I'll be moving on to chapter 10 next. And I was just sitting here thinking how I should do my thank you. I hope you and the dogs did too. Yeah, well, I had a dog laying there, but one's kind of socked out on the floor there, and the other one's right there. Riv is over here. But yeah, I like to have, yeah, I saw them. Okay. I like to have them in the background. It's kind of folksy. I'm trying to go for a, I don't know, maybe it's a new kind of genre. I thought like, I like the mafia, I like organized crime, I like Hells Angels, I like Whitey Bulger, obviously. And I thought, you know, if you start a channel that's like mafia genre, you're gonna get hammered, man. You're gonna get like, they're going to nail you like if you say anything wrong, right? Well, if I read a book, then technically I can't say anything wrong. I can only read what is in the pages of this book. So I thought it's an interesting concept. Little different. I don't see anybody doing it, but I'm not getting a lot of views either. I mean, like, God, like what? I got one person. I'm very happy to have you here right now, Stock Explorer. But I know I go on your chat and you get hundreds of people. So, and you're just talking. I mean, I could go on and talk at length too. But anyways, I also came to the conclusion that here's a neat concept too. I was thinking that, wouldn't it be neat to have I looked into the StreamYard and I kind of understand that now, how I can split screen and whatnot. Now, when I finish this book, wouldn't it be cool to be able to have tracked down this guy, Kevin Weeks, who wrote this book, Whitey Bulger's right-hand man there, and interview him, you know, like do a show, our show, break it up like how all these people do. And yeah, I've had my channel going for 4 years, man. Like, frankly, I think I'm even like, I did a few big ones recently, like Remembrance Day and Pacific Run. Those are pretty epic movies that, like I say, I don't even shoot these movies. People from the club and people who are friends of the club, they send me videos, like dozens of videos I get. And from what I take and what they send me, I put it together and I make these movies, right? Like, Pacific Run 2022 was pretty epic. Just, I can share you. Thank you very much. I much appreciated. Yeah, because anyway, so I'm going to try to. I was looking at my on my channel too. I should be putting it all of these books I read into the separate, so that if somebody really did want to put it on like from the beginning, they could just let it run, right, and they could listen to it all. So I got to do that. I just been putting it in the one. I don't even know what you call that anymore. The let's see here. Oh, playlist. That's right. Yeah. So it'll be a playlist I'm gonna do of Kevin Weeks' book Brutal here. It's been a great book. Actually, I really enjoyed it. But that's another thing I'm gonna do. And I notice, like, here is the thing with this is maybe I'm not getting a lot of views, or pardon me, a lot of people watching my live stream, but I notice I'm getting a lot of friggin' hits, like probably potentially viral hits on the videos, because when you search Whitey Bulger, Kevin Weeks, Brutal, the book, it comes up, right? So this is a great subject, is right. And staying on that note is, thank you for sharing it, much appreciated. The books I read, I must be very selective about the books I read, because if I'm reading a book that nobody is going to look for, or it doesn't marry up with a popular or interesting subject, then why would I read it? I'd be spending hours and hours and hours. I mean, you look at the videos I've done now just on this book. I think I just put up my 10th or whatever it is. And, usually the chapters are around 20 pages each, taking you a little over an hour to read, and that's time consuming. Not that I care, because I'm just sitting here reading a book anyway. So, but I thought I'd start making videos out of it. So the subject I read is very important, is what I'm saying. How cold is it there? Not very cold. I know it's like I'm sitting around in my underwear mostly here, because my wood stove is still going. Last night we got rain, like torrential downpour. We had a snap of a snow storm, but today we're Celsius, so I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's around 3 degrees today, so, and raining. I think it's going to rain for like a week now. Unfortunately, I backed my damn truck into the gate there and wrecked my goddamn tail light and scraped the shit out of the side of the truck. Fucking pissed me off, man. I'll tell you, it's like, like my bike, it's like the only nice thing I have, and I gotta fucking wreck it. So I gotta go deal with that shit, get it fixed. Yeah, pretty unfortunate. That was on New Year's or Christmas Eve day, and I hadn't gone out for about a week, man, and it snowed like crazy. And what I did is I backed it out, and it kind of slid down, and I put it in 4x4, and then just give it a bit of gas. I was like, boom! I was like, what the fuck? I get it. Oh, no, man. I was like, pull my truck forward and fucking taillight, on my Dodge Ram hanging down, and, like, uh, then I put it back the best I could. And fuck, when I went out, man, it was just insane. The water. And then I checked, and I went up to get some weed, and I went up to get some food and that, and I stopped at the weed store there to check it out. And there was some major flooding, like major flooding on the road, and just had like a wall of water come over my truck, and I think I don't know, I got scraped the shit out of that side there, so yeah, I gotta go down on the insurance and get that sorted, which sucks, man, because oh well, I'll get it sorted. You just can't have anything nice. So moving forward with my series, so I'm going to finish this one up. I also think too, it's like I say, I guess people could say, oh, you read bad, or you're, I don't know, like there's all these haters out there all the time. But like I say, what are they going to say? It's a bad book. You don't read good. My next book, like I say, I'm taking calculated. I'm really thinking about what I want to read because it's quite time consuming. And I was going to read this book, but I think I'm going to hold off. Now, this guy's grandson's quite popular right now because he's getting something going, right? Tor, his name is. That'd be kind of neat to read his grandfather's book, Man of Honor, which is like, I mean, this is a book to read. Like, I really want to do this, but it's huge, right? And I could do it, but it'll just take a while. But what I think I'm going to read next is, and I just ordered, is J. Dobbins' No Angel. Now, I've read that book before. I'm in an MC, so that's one of the books that first kind of turned me on to all of this stuff, like with that there's cops out there trying to infiltrate, and we've all seen all these stories, Donnie Brasco. Anyways, J. Dobbins, I always remember that. I read that book, and that guy, Red Dog, he knew he was a cop. And when I look at these pictures of J. Dobbins, all like, ooh, like all these stupid looking pictures of him, like, oh, like with his hat. No, I thought, nobody fucking acts like that in the MC world. I'd never been around a clown like that, anyway, and I'm around it all the time. And so no wonder they had him pegged as a phony, and he couldn't fucking ride, they say. So how are you going to be MC if you can't ride? Like, I can speak to that too because uh, before I got my Road Glide, my 17 Road Glide, which is an M8 engine, I had a hard time keeping up. Like, I'd be like in fifth gear, just like fucking whining it out, like sixth gear, maxing out my bike, and like I had like parts rattle off it before. It was a '08 Street Glide. So, but when I upgraded to my 17 Road Glide, it's the M8 engine. It's going to make a difference, right? So now it was like a shakeout I did when I rode with the Club 2 Revelstoke, and we were led by, I won't say who, but and we had to keep up with them, right? So I learned and I was right on their ass, the two of them, and me and my bro from the club were like right on their ass the whole way, and I'm talking like 10-hour rides. So it was hardcore, and I really learned though the power of my bike and my riding skills. I can ride like that now, and you need the bike to ride like that. Riding home often I rode with another guy who's a crazy mofo, man, and the four of us rode back peg to peg, like just wouldn't leave his ass, and he's trying to lose us, man. But see, again, I know my bike is superior to his, and he's not going to lose me. There's no way. And I got to work on my bike. I'll have it down to max cycles, just a couple of performance improvements I need to do. Number one is suspension. I'm going with O-lines, front and rear. The gas shocks in black. I'm not going with gold ones. Don't worry. And and I got good tires, but I'm supposed to ride to Quebec this summer. So later in the season, closer to July, I'll be having new rubber put on. Performance-wise, too, the cam. Thinking about doing that to open this puppy up because it's only a 107. Now, when I say 107, that's kind of funny because, it's like a 1700, I think it's 1743 cc motorcycle. It's like It's massive. It's massive. It's powerful. It's heavy. It's the real deal, you know. And riding over the hump here, like the mountain pass that you've probably seen on the videos there before. It's I want to do a race, a run. Never wrote. I know, man. Like I got a couple bikes out there too. I got a ZXR 600 Kawasaki that I raced the mountain pass with. Haven't done that in a while. We're not allowed to wear colors on a job bike, but still, I'd go. That'd be fine. Uh, I also have a off-road, like a Duro. I did a video on a Honda 660R or XR, I think it is. Yeah, an Enduro. I never ride the fucking thing. I think I've also got that quad out there. Beautiful quad, Kodiak. Did a video on that. But yeah, it's kind of rural here, where I live. So yeah, I had a Suzuki Dual Sport. Yeah, so did I. That was big fun. Yeah, I had a, what is that, a DR? I think I had a DR 500, something like that, back in the day. When I was in Petawawa with the Army there at the Airborne. It was all like the training area there, So it was like I could ride my dirt bike or my enduro like down the road or whatever, and then there was like a series of trails I could drop down to, and then it was just like bye bye. I could disappear out into the training area, and like you always knew what was going on. They would like gate off areas or whatever, like if there was live fire going on. So it was always, yeah, super adventurous, man. But back in the 90s, yeah, back in another world. It seems like the airborne days. But yeah, that's super cool. Thanks a lot for coming on. I'm probably going to do another live stream today because that chapter I just read there was only around 40 minutes, so that was a little bit of a break. Yeah, the weather is definitely changing. It's going to be raining, and I'll probably be letting the fire go out today because it's just too friggin' hot. Sun's shining. I need to get out with the dogs for a bit too, get them out. We've just been so staying home alone and hermiting. I guess that's our new thing, is to be a book nerd and read about organized crime. All right, well, I'm going to wrap up Stock Explorer. If you were on here, you know, I want to talk to you about stocks, actually. Let's talk stocks because okay, well, anyways, we should talk stocks someday, like, because I got a huge portfolio, and that's kind of like my other sideline. So, like, you should be looking at some Canadian stocks, man, on the Toronto Stock Exchange, because look at it this way: they pay huge dividends. If I were you, I'd be going for some Canadian banks right now. Bank of Commerce, TD, Royal Bank, any of the big five. I have a ton of Scotiabank. You know, like if you look at any of those Canadian banks, okay, look at it this way: your money is worth probably 30. I'm going to say 33% more than ours. So you're getting a discount right there. Also, these bank stocks pay nice dividends. Talking like 5-6%, some of them, and quarterly. So if you had that on a drip dividend reinvestment plan, reloading all the time, you're going to make some nice money. Plus, they're going to gain in capital. Like, I mean, some of these bank stocks are going to skyrocket. You're going to make, talking like $40-50 a share, maybe some of them. So it's not bad. It's not bad at all. And maybe you will get nailed with some kind of, like I do. I get nailed with, because I have a lot of American stocks, obviously. Yeah, look into it. Like you can trade, like I trade on Quest Trade. I'm sure you've got one of those ones on your phone. I'm on the oil stocks. Yeah, yeah. Like I like that. I have a lot of Canadian oil stocks. Suncor is one. And Algonquin Power is another power company. Like, there's a lot of there is a lot of stocks out there right now. Obviously, you know this, that have been beaten down, and the quality stocks, even ones that have been beaten down, like I said, these Canadian banks or some of the major industries that pay the good dividends. Not Prudential, but it was Phillips 66 was a stock I liked. Yeah, you know. So anyway, that's my take on some Canadian stock picks for you there. But don't take my advice. Do your own research, and of course, it's at your own risk. I'm just a guy, just a dumb army guy, like I always say, an old army guy. All right, well, come on one morning with us. I'd love to put you up. Hey, yeah, like I would do that. Sure, it'd be fun. You know, you could talk about my dogs in the background too, because for sure, man. All right, well, I'm gonna get going here. It's nice talking to you. I hope you had a Merry Christmas, and you're gonna have a great New Year's, I'm sure. I'm out.